What if the most powerful moment of healing in your life began not with a breakthrough, but with a whisper? What if the freedom you've been chasing doesn't come from fixing everything, but from finally telling the truth? What if the one door you've been avoiding is the only one that leads to peace? I didn't expect much that Saturday. It was just supposed to be a quiet visit to church, a routine confession, in and out. I hadn't been in years, and I didn't think I'd say anything profound. Honestly, I didn't even feel worthy of being there. But I was tired. Not just physically, but spiritually. Like something inside me had been holding its breath for too long, and I was finally ready to exhale. That's how grace works. It doesn't shout, it whispers. And if you're listening closely, it calls you back, not to shame, but to healing. For me, confession had always been a background sacrament. I grew up with the church, went through the motions, baptism, communion, confirmation. I knew the words, I understood the process, but I never really believed confession could change anything. It felt like checking a box, getting a reset, moving on, until life got messy, slowly, subtly. The kind of unraveling you don't notice until everything feels tangled. One compromise, one lie. One choice to numb instead of feel. Before long, I wasn't even sure who I was anymore, and no one could tell from the outside. I still smiled, I still worked, I still showed up, but inside I was sinking. Then one night, scrolling aimlessly through my phone, I saw a quote. "Confession isn't where you go to be punished, it's where you go to be healed." I stared at it like it was written just for me. Something inside stirred. Not a bolt of conviction, just a flicker of hope. So I went. I walked into that church carrying years of regret. I sat in the back pew for what felt like forever. The voice in my head told me to leave. "You're being dramatic. It won't change anything. You don't even know how to start." But something deeper said stay. And eventually, I stood up. The confessional wasn't glowing with holiness. The priest wasn't surrounded by angels. It was just a room, just a man, just me. And the silence. I stumbled through my words. My voice cracked. My hands shook. But I kept going. I told the truth, not the rehearsed, polished version I had practiced in my head. The real truth, the messy, human, painful truth I had been carrying alone for too long. And when I finished, he didn't lecture me. He didn't make me feel small. He said, "God has already been waiting to forgive you." And in that one sentence, everything shifted. It wasn't emotional fireworks. It wasn't loud. It was like finally letting go of something I didn't even know was crushing me. A breath I didn't know I was holding. A weight I didn't realize I could set down. I walked out of that confessional the same person, but also not. Something had been lifted, not erased, but redeemed. That's the power of confession. It doesn't erase your past, it reframes it in grace. It doesn't pretend your wounds don't exist, it invites God into them. And the more I reflected on it, the more I realized I wasn't alone. So many people live with quiet shame, regret they bury, guilt they normalize. We carry so much thinking we're supposed to. But what if healing is closer than we think? What if freedom isn't about trying harder, but about surrendering sooner? That's what confession is. Surrender. Honest, raw, holy surrender. And it saved me. Not because I became perfect, but because I became honest. That's where healing always begins. I didn't fully understand it then, but something profound had happened in that confessional. Not just a moment of spiritual release, but a reorientation, a recalibration of who I was and who I believed God to be. For so long, I thought I had to clean myself up before I could come back to God, that I had to fix my life before I could be forgiven. But confession flipped that narrative on its head. I didn't have to fix everything. I just had to come home. And home is exactly what it felt like. I walked out of the church that day and felt the sunlight differently. It wasn't brighter, it wasn't warmer, but it felt like I could finally see it. Like my heart had been carrying around a weight that had made everything look dim. Now everything was clear, not perfect, but clear. That clarity changed the way I moved through the rest of the day. I spoke differently, slower, more present. I didn't feel like I had to hide. I wasn't performing, I wasn't pretending, I was just free. And that freedom followed me into the next day and the next. It changed the way I saw people, especially the people I had hurt, especially the people who had hurt me. I didn't suddenly forget what they had done, but I felt less attached to resentment. Like God wasn't just healing me, but also softening the places in me that had been hardened by pain. It wasn't magic, it was mercy. Mercy is the word that kept coming to mind every time I tried to explain what had happened to friends. Most of them weren't Catholic, some weren't religious at all. So I didn't go into theology. I just told them the truth. I confessed everything, and instead of judgment, I found mercy. And to my surprise, they didn't pull away. They leaned in, because deep down, everyone is looking for mercy. In a culture obsessed with image and control, confession is radically countercultural. It says, you don't have to pretend. You don't have to curate your life for approval. You don't have to carry what's breaking you. You can be known fully and still be loved. And isn't that what we're all longing for? That's why I went back. Not because I became super holy overnight, because I knew I'd need that grace again. I still failed. I still messed up. But I wasn't afraid of my sin anymore. I wasn't defined by it. I had a place to bring it, a place to name it, and most importantly, a place to leave it. Confession became my lifeline, not just when I was in crisis, but as a rhythm, as a way of staying honest, staying open, staying close to God. Because when you know you're forgiven, you live differently. You love more freely. You forgive more quickly. You let go of things you used to cling to, like pride, perfection, control. And slowly that mercy starts to transform not just your heart, but your habits, your relationships, your inner dialogue. That's what began to happen in me. Grace didn't just cleanse me, it started to rebuild me, one confession at a time. Over the next few weeks, I found myself coming back to that same church more often, not always for confession, but just to sit, to be still, to let my heart recalibrate in the presence of the one who already knew everything about me and still chose to love me. There's something wildly healing about being fully known and still embraced. Most of us live afraid of being exposed, afraid that if people really knew our secrets, our past, our private failures, they'd leave. But God is the opposite. He already knows, and still he stays. That's what I tasted in confession, and that taste kept pulling me back, not in guilt, but in gratitude. I started noticing changes in how I reacted to things. I didn't snap as easily. I didn't spiral into shame when I messed up. Instead, I heard that quiet whisper, "Come back, try again." That's the voice I had been missing for years. The one that doesn't condemn but invites, doesn't demand perfection, but welcomes process. The saints talk about the sacrament of healing. That's exactly what confession became for me. It wasn't a place I went out of fear. It became a place I went for freedom, a space where I could be real and walk away lighter, clearer, stronger. One day I invited a friend to come with me. He hadn't been to confession in over a decade. At first he resisted, said he didn't believe it would matter. Why would I tell another person the stuff I hate about myself? He asked. I didn't argue. I just shared what had happened to me. I told him, it's not about shame, it's about release. It's about handing over what's been eating you alive and hearing out loud that God still wants you. Eventually he came, and afterward he said, I thought I'd feel judged, but I've never felt so relieved in my life. That's the secret so few people understand about confession. It's not about guilt, it's about grace. It's about experiencing, in real time, the mercy of God, not as a vague concept, but as a personal encounter. And the more I went, the more I wanted to stay clean. Not out of fear, but out of love. I didn't want to numb out or run away anymore. I wanted to stay close to the one who set me free. And when I did mess up, as we all do, I knew exactly where to go. I didn't spiral into self-hate. I didn't drown in denial. I ran to confession because I knew I'd find truth there. And not just truth, but tenderness. For the first time in my adult life, I started to believe that maybe God wasn't disappointed in me. Maybe he actually delighted in me, even in my weakness. Maybe his love was bigger than my sin. And when you start to believe that, you stop hiding. You start healing. You live differently. Because you're not trying to be perfect. You're trying to be faithful. That realization didn't just stay in my head. It began to seep into my everyday life. I found myself walking through my days with more softness, more awareness. I wasn't constantly scanning for mistakes or trying to prove something. I had nothing to prove. I was already loved, already seen, already forgiven. And that gave me a kind of quiet confidence I hadn't known I was missing. There's a humility that comes with knowing you're forgiven, not just once, but continually. It's not about beating yourself up, it's about being rooted in truth. And truth, I was learning, isn't harsh, it's holy. Even when it cuts, it heals. One of the most surprising things was how my conversations started to change. I used to avoid vulnerable topics, afraid that if I opened up, people would think less of me. But now I found myself leaning into those deeper talks, about doubt, about brokenness, about grace. And to my amazement, people didn't shy away. They opened up too. There's something contagious about authenticity. When you go first, when you're honest, you give others permission to be honest too. Confession had stripped away so much of the noise in my life, the lies I believed, the guilt I carried, the fear I hid behind. In its place was something quieter, but far more powerful: peace. I remember one moment in particular. I was sitting alone in my apartment, just thinking, no distractions, no music, no phone, just silence. And I realized I wasn't afraid of being alone with myself anymore. I wasn't running from my thoughts. I wasn't drowning in regret. I was okay. Not perfect, but at peace. That kind of peace doesn't come from ignoring your past. It comes from facing it with God beside you. And slowly I started to see that this wasn't just about me. It wasn't just my story. It was an invitation for anyone willing to come close, anyone willing to let go of the mask, anyone brave enough to walk into the confessional, not knowing exactly what to say, but willing to start. Because that's all it takes, a start. You don't need the perfect words, you don't need a grand gesture, you just need to show up. And when you do, something happens, something sacred. It's not always dramatic, it's not always emotional, but it's real, and it changes you. I began to pray differently too, not just asking God for things, but simply sitting with Him, letting Him love me, letting Him speak in the silence. And the more I did, the more I realized how much I had been missing out on, not just spiritually, but relationally. I'd been missing out on intimacy, on connection, on the kind of closeness that doesn't come from perfection, but from presence. One night I lit a candle and just sat on the floor, journal in hand, and wrote this: Lord, I don't want to go back to hiding. I want to stay in the light, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's hard, because the light is where you are, and I don't want to live without you anymore. That was a turning point, not because everything became easy after that, but because I had finally stopped pretending, and that changed everything. More to come in the next part. Let me know when you're ready for it. It's strange how something as small as a whispered prayer or a quiet confession can ripple outward and start to reorder everything. Not just your relationship with God, but your relationship with yourself. I began to notice how much of my past behavior had been driven by fear. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of being truly known. But with each return to the sacrament, that fear lost a little more of its grip. I wasn't just being forgiven, I was being formed. That formation wasn't flashy or immediate. It didn't look like spiritual fireworks. It looked like small, daily choices. Choosing to speak kindly to myself, choosing to apologize more quickly, choosing to pause before reacting, choosing silence over noise, prayer over panic, love over defense. It looked like refusing to let shame take the driver's seat again. And sometimes it meant returning to that confessional, even when I didn't feel like it. Not because I had committed some dramatic sin, but because I knew my heart was starting to drift. I had learned that drifting didn't always look like rebellion. Sometimes it looked like numbness, like disengagement, like spiritual sleepwalking. And confession had become the place that woke me up. Each time I went, it was as if God was reminding me, I see you, I haven't left. Let's keep going. And I did, one small yes at a time. Eventually, I began volunteering at my parish, helping with a ministry for people returning to the church after years away. I would sit in small groups and listen to their stories full of pain, confusion, regret, and I recognized the look in their eyes. I had worn it too. That look that said, I'm not sure if I belong here. That quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, it's not too late. I never gave them theology lectures. I just shared what had happened to me. How confession didn't shame me, it saved me. How I stopped seeing it as a courtroom and started seeing it as a hospital. And how healing is real. Not just in theory, but in flesh and blood, heart and soul. And again, I watched their walls come down. Not because of anything I said, but because truth resonates. Because grace invites. Because when you've been loved in your lowest moment, you carry that love with you. You become a witness. I had become a witness, not to my own strength, but to God's mercy, not to a perfect life, but to a redeemed one. And redemption doesn't mean your past disappears. It means your past is no longer your prison. It becomes a testimony, a doorway, a point of contact between your pain and someone else's hope. I started seeing people differently too. Strangers on the street, friends I had grown distant from, even family members I had struggled to forgive. My heart wasn't hardened anymore. It wasn't perfect, but it was open. And that openness changed the way I loved. Because when you've encountered the mercy of God, you can't help but become merciful. Not because you're trying to be good, but because you've seen what goodness really looks like. You've tasted it, and now you want others to taste it too. It's not always easy. Sometimes I still default to old patterns. Sometimes I catch myself judging others, or spiraling into self-doubt, or chasing validation in all the wrong places. But now I recognize it. I name it. I bring it into the light. And that light, the light I once feared, is now my refuge. I know what to do with my weakness. I know where to go with my wounds, and that is freedom. Freedom isn't the absence of struggle. It's the presence of grace in the middle of it. It's knowing that you're not walking alone, that your mess doesn't disqualify you, that your story is still unfolding, and that God is a far better author than you could ever be. That truth is what anchors me now. Not emotion, not performance, not certainty. Just trust. Trust that God is who He says He is, that He meets us in the low places, that He never tires of welcoming us back, that confession isn't a relic of the past, it's a rescue for the present. And maybe, just maybe, the world doesn't need more perfect Christians. Maybe it needs more honest ones. People who are willing to say, I messed up, and here's what God did with it. People who stop hiding and start healing. People who know that the most powerful kind of strength is found in surrender. Because at the end of the day, that's what confession is, holy surrender. And it's the most courageous, life-changing decision I've ever made. I began to wonder how many others were silently longing for the same thing, for a safe place to be broken, to be real, to begin again. And not in a superficial way, not with a motivational quote or a fleeting burst of emotion, but in a way that rewired the soul. That kind of transformation doesn't happen in a vacuum. It needs space, it needs silence, and most of all, it needs truth. Confession became the one place where I couldn't pretend. I had to show up as I was, no filters, no justifications, no half-truths. And there was something sacred about that rawness. Because in a world that constantly demands we market ourselves, that we curate our image and manage perception, confession offered the opposite, a place to be unmasked. And with every unmasking, I felt more whole. That wholeness didn't come from perfection. It came from integration, from allowing every part of me, even the messy ones, to be seen and held by God. I stopped compartmentalizing my life. I stopped trying to be spiritual in one space and human in another. Confession reminded me that God doesn't just want the good parts of me. He wants all of me. The confusion, the anger, the fear, the longing. And in receiving all of me, He started to transform all of me. Even the parts I thought were beyond saving. Especially those parts. I started to carry that awareness into my daily life. When I failed, I didn't spiral. I repented. When I was tempted to lie, I remembered how freeing it felt to tell the truth. When I wanted to isolate, I reached out instead. Not because I had suddenly become strong, but because I had learned where to bring my weakness. That shift changed how I saw the church too. I used to view it as a set of rules, a place I had to measure up. But now I saw it as a field hospital, a place where the wounded come, a place where healing begins. The sacraments weren't obligations anymore, they were lifelines, touch points of divine love in a very real, very broken world. And confession? It was no longer just a sacrament, it was a sanctuary, a place where I had met God, not in thunder but in whisper, not in judgment but in joy. Joy, that's what had surprised me most. I had expected sorrow, maybe even shame, but what I encountered was joy. The kind that doesn't depend on circumstances. The kind that wells up from the deepest part of you and says, you are free. Free to be loved, free to start again, free to live without the chains of your past. And that joy stayed with me. It changed how I prayed, how I worked, how I rested. It changed how I walked through the world. I no longer felt like a fraud trying to hold it all together. I felt like a beloved child learning to trust again. And every time I doubted that truth, I went back to the place where I'd first heard it, in that small, quiet room with a priest who didn't shame me and a God who didn't turn away. Just me and mercy, again and again. That mercy began to shape not just my spiritual life, but the way I moved through every other space I entered. At work, I was less defensive. In conversations, I listened more deeply. Even in conflict, I didn't explode or withdraw like I used to. I leaned in with curiosity instead of control. It was as if confession had peeled back layers I didn't know I was hiding behind. And beneath it all was someone I was finally getting to know. My real self. Not the version of me I had crafted to keep everyone comfortable, but the person God had always seen and loved. There's something disarming about being fully seen and not rejected. It makes you bold in the best way. Not arrogant, but anchored. I wasn't trying to earn love anymore. I was learning to live from it. And as I began to live that way, the ripple effects touched places I hadn't even intended. Friends I hadn't heard from in years reached out, not because I had posted anything dramatic or preached at them, but because they noticed a shift. "You seem different," they'd say, "more grounded. What changed?" And I'd tell them the truth. I stopped running. I stopped pretending. I walked into a confessional thinking I'd feel judged, and instead I found peace. At first, they didn't know what to do with that. Some would nod politely, others would change the subject. But a few, just enough to matter, would lean in. "Tell me more." So I did, and slowly something beautiful began to unfold. My story became a bridge, a mirror, a soft invitation to others who were also tired of performing, tired of carrying secrets, tired of wondering if they could ever be free. And even if they didn't fully understand the sacrament, they understood the longing behind it, the desire to be known and still loved. That desire is universal. We were made for connection, for communion, for reconciliation. And confession, I was discovering, wasn't just a personal reset, it was a relational one. It healed how I related to God, but also how I related to others. It reminded me that none of us are too far gone. That mercy isn't a reward for the righteous, it's a lifeline for the lost. Not in the dramatic, scandalous way we sometimes imagine, but in quiet, ordinary ways. I had drifted, I had numbed out. I had settled for distance because it felt safer than intimacy. But now, I wanted intimacy. I craved it. I wanted to live with my heart fully engaged, fully alive, fully surrendered. That surrender wasn't just about admitting sin. It was about relinquishing control, about letting God write the story instead of constantly editing it myself. And as I did, I began to see redemption unfold in real time. Not always through grand gestures, but through ordinary grace. Like the moment I forgave someone I thought I never could. Or the quiet night I chose prayer over scrolling. Or the unexpected tears I cried during Mass, not out of guilt, but gratitude. These weren't just emotional moments. They were signs that something deeper was shifting. I was becoming new. Not all at once, but undeniably. And that newness wasn't something I had to strive to maintain. It flowed from staying connected to the source. Confession had opened the door, but what kept me walking forward was staying close to God, letting His voice be the loudest in my life. And His voice? It was never harsh, never rushed, never shaming. It was steady, gentle, and true. The more I listened, the more I trusted. And the more I trusted, the more I healed. Healing, I learned, isn't a single moment. It's a journey, a layering of grace over the cracked parts of our soul, a reweaving of our identity, not based on what we've done, but on who we are. Beloved. That word started to mean everything to me, not as a concept, but as a core truth. I was beloved, not because I earned it, but because that's who God is. He doesn't wait for us to get it together. He moves toward us right in the middle of our mess. He meets us in the shadows and He brings light. Real, warm, healing light. And in that light, I finally saw myself clearly, not as the sum of my failures, but as a soul worth redeeming. That clarity changed how I saw everything. Confession didn't just reconcile me to God, it reconciled me to myself. I no longer felt like I had to fight against my own story. I could embrace it, even the hard chapters, even the ones I once wished I could erase. Because now I could see what God was doing all along. He wasn't just fixing me, He was forming me, shaping my heart through every step of surrender, transforming wounds into wells of wisdom, turning shame into testimony. And that testimony, it wasn't just mine to keep, it was meant to be shared. So I kept sharing, with friends, with strangers, with anyone who had ever wondered if they were too far gone. I told them what had become the most important truth in my life. There's no sin too big for mercy, no distance too great for grace, no story too broken for redemption. Confession is not a place of endings, it's a place of beginnings, a starting point for a new kind of life, one rooted not in fear, but in faith. Not in striving, but in surrender. Not in hiding, but in healing. And healing is always possible. It's possible for you. It starts with a whisper. It starts with a step. It starts with telling the truth and letting God meet you there. So if you're carrying something heavy, if you're tired of pretending, if you've wondered whether it's too late or too messy or too complicated to come back, let me tell you this: you are not alone. You are not disqualified, and you are not beyond the reach of grace. Come back, come home, and let healing begin. If this story has moved something in your heart, I invite you to follow this journey of mercy, redemption, and truth. Subscribe to Holy Path Insight, a space for the seekers, the strugglers, and the saints in the making. There's more to explore, more to learn, more to receive. Because the path of holiness isn't about perfection, it's about presence. And together we'll keep walking it, one honest step at a time.